What if one of history's most iconic women wasn't who we think she was? Was Cleopatra really a seductress who used her body to manipulate empires? Or was she a genius strategist who almost changed the course of the ancient world? We've heard the stories, the eyeliner, the lovers, the drama. But what if we've been lied to for over 2,000 years? This is not just the story of a queen. This is the story of power, politics, and perception. Welcome to Historical Channel, uncovering untold stories, hidden facts, and the strangest chapters of history. In 51 BC, Egypt was not the center of the world anymore. The pyramids were already ancient. The Nile still flowed, but its empire was drowning. The once mighty kingdom of the pharaohs had become a client state, a pawn in the growing chessboard of Rome's ambition. That's when she entered the stage. Cleopatra VII, 18 years old, educated, fluent in 9 languages, the first Ptolemaic ruler in centuries who actually spoke Egyptian. She wasn't just royalty. She was brilliant, raised on strategy, philosophy, science, and war. But intelligence wouldn't be enough, because when she came to power, Egypt was already on fire. The Nile was flooding at the wrong times. The economy was collapsing. Rome was demanding payment and influence, and her greatest enemy was inside her own palace. Her co-ruler, her own brother, a child king, but behind him was a nest of vipers, corrupt generals, greedy eunuchs, advisors who saw Cleopatra not as queen but as a threat. They forced her out, stripped her of power, banished from the city she was born to rule. Most would have stayed in hiding, played it safe, waited, married into safety. But Cleopatra, she was planning. In 48 BC, Destiny sailed into Egypt, wearing a red Roman cape. Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, chasing his rival Pompey. But when he stepped onto Egyptian soil, everything changed. Pompey had already been murdered, decapitated by Cleopatra's brother in a desperate bid to please Caesar. It didn't. It disgusted him. And in the middle of that political storm, Cleopatra made her move. She didn't beg for help. She didn't cry. She appeared, calm, calculated, captivating. Was it seduction? Maybe. But it was also a masterstroke. Yes, she was smuggled into his chambers. She stepped out like a scene from a play. But don't mistake spectacle for weakness. She wasn't throwing herself at Caesar's feet. She was asserting control in her own way. She presented herself not as a helpless queen, but as a capable ruler, fluent in his language, trained in philosophy, history, politics. She didn't flirt. She negotiated. What began as politics turned into partnership. Cleopatra needed Rome's power to secure her throne. Caesar needed Egypt's grain, ships, and gold to fund his ambitions. And perhaps they both found something else. Mutual respect. Yes, they became lovers. But more importantly, they became political allies. Together, they defeated Cleopatra's brother in a brutal civil war. Cleopatra was reinstated, not as a puppet, but as Pharaoh. From that alliance came a child, Ptolemy 15, known to history as Caesarion, the Little Caesar, the only biological son Julius Caesar ever acknowledged. For Cleopatra, he wasn't just a child. He was a symbol, a future. In her mind, Caesarion could unite 2 worlds, Rome's power and Egypt's legacy. When Cleopatra visited Rome in 46 BC, she didn't sneak in. She arrived like a queen, draped in silk, guarded by eunuchs, speaking her language, Greek, in the heart of the Latin world. To the Roman elite, it was scandalous. Caesar was already married. Cleopatra was seen as dangerous. Caesar treated her like royalty, even placed a statue of her in the Temple of Venus. To the Senate, that was the last straw. And then, March 15th, 44 BC, the knives came out. Julius Caesar was assassinated, stabbed by men who claimed to defend the Republic. And just like that, her protector was gone. Her plans shattered. With her protector gone, she sailed back to Egypt, alone, surrounded by vultures. She left Rome the same way she came in, quietly. But she wasn't the same woman anymore. She had seen the heart of power, and now she would protect her son at any cost. While Rome tore itself apart in civil war, Cleopatra tightened her grip on Egypt. She strengthened the navy, rebuilt alliances, raised Caesarion as her heir. And in her mind, Caesarion would one day rule both lands. A boy god, a living heir to Caesar. Rome wasn't finished with her, and she wasn't finished with Rome. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, the Roman Republic didn't heal. It descended into chaos. The Senate believed they had saved Rome, but instead, they unleashed civil war. Two names rose from the ashes: Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, barely 19, and Mark Antony, Caesar's fiercest general and closest friend. One ruled with the law, the other with the sword, but both wanted Caesar's legacy, and only one could claim it. Far from the chaos, Cleopatra watched, waited, calculated. Rome's war was not yet her war, but she knew it would come to her doorstep. She had a son, Caesarion, and if Rome discovered his bloodline, he'd be next. In 41 BC, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus. He demanded answers, allegiance, support. But Cleopatra didn't obey orders. She made an entrance. She came dressed as the goddess Isis, draped in gold, draped in myth, her sails perfumed, her servants divine. Mark Antony was a soldier. He expected a queen. What he saw was a legend. That first meeting wasn't flirtation. It was power meeting power. Yes, they became lovers. But that wasn't the foundation. What bound them together was ambition. Cleopatra needed a Roman shield. Antony needed Egypt's gold. Together they could build an empire, not just for themselves, but for their children. They had 3 children, royal by blood, heirs to east and west. She didn't just want a throne. She wanted a legacy. Back in Rome, Octavian seethed. Cleopatra wasn't just a woman to him, she was a virus infecting the Roman mind. He unleashed propaganda, painted Antony as bewitched, painted Cleopatra as a serpent, a threat to the Roman way of life. Octavian didn't fight armies, he fought narratives, and his worked. In 34 BC, Antony and Cleopatra staged a grand ceremony in Alexandria. The donations, a spectacle of royalty. They named Caesarion co-ruler of Egypt. Their twins were declared rulers of Armenia, Cyrenaica, and beyond. It was bold, it was symbolic, and to Octavian, it was war. In 32 BC, Octavian declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. Why? Because Rome would never accept being ruled by a queen from the east. He framed her as the puppet master, the threat to Roman sovereignty, the woman who must be crushed. September 2nd, 31 BC, the Ionian Sea, the Battle of Actium. They had lost everything. The Battle of Actium wasn't just a military defeat, It was the unraveling of a dream. In the aftermath, Antony and Cleopatra fled to Alexandria, broken, haunted by what could have been. It was the greatest military disaster of his life, and the end of hers. They sealed the palace, they buried their treasure, but outside the people were starving, and Rome was coming. Mark Antony, once the Lion of Rome, was now a ghost of himself. He who had ridden beside Caesar, who once commanded legions across continents, now sat in shadows, drowning in memory. His legions had deserted him, his allies abandoned him, and even his name was being erased. Then the final cruelty, a rumor, a lie, whispered through corridors planted by enemies. Cleopatra was dead. He believed it. And in that moment, everything collapsed. He took his own sword and fell on it. But death didn't come quickly. The lie had worked too well. Cleopatra lived, but the man who fought beside her was bleeding to death on a marble floor. They brought him to her, dying, broken. He died in her arms, and with him, the last man who stood between Cleopatra and the wrath of Rome. What do you do when the storm has taken everything? When your empire is gone? When the man you built it with dies believing you're already dead? For the first time in her life, Cleopatra was truly alone. August 30th, 30 BC. Alexandria, the final jewel of the ancient world, was now occupied. Egypt had fallen without a fight. It was no longer a kingdom. It was a prize of war. Cleopatra had lost her lover, her armies, her future, but not her dignity. Octavian arrived not as a liberator, but as a conqueror. To him, Egypt was no longer a sovereign land. It was a Roman province. He wanted no bloodshed, just submission. And he had one final target, the woman who defied Rome. They met face to face. Octavian, young, cold, political. Cleopatra, grieving, regal, defiant. She offered everything. Her ships, her treasure, her exile, even Caesarion's life. But he didn't want her cooperation. He wanted her humiliated, paraded through Rome in chains, displayed in his triumph like a captured animal. A symbol, a warning, that Rome now ruled everything, even the gods. But Cleopatra was not a symbol, not a prize, and she would never be paraded. So she made her final decision, one not recorded in Roman scrolls, but written in silence. Cleopatra arranged her own burial. She sent for her artisans, had her tomb prepared, every detail, every ritual, down to the linen, the incense, every symbol, carefully chosen. The placement of her body beside Antony's. Even in death, she would not be separated from him. This would not be Rome's ending. It would be hers. To buy time, she sent a letter to Octavian. It promised surrender, but it was a lie. She dressed like a goddess, because that's how she began, and that's how she would end. How exactly she died, we'll never know. Some say it was an asp, smuggled in beneath a basket of figs. Others say it was poison hidden in a hairpin. Some whisper it was a blade, quietly taken to the wrist. But one thing is certain, Cleopatra made sure her death was hers. When Octavian's guards broke down the tomb doors, it was too late. The queen was gone, and with her died 3 centuries of Ptolemaic rule. The last pharaoh of Egypt, the last to challenge Rome. Her son, Caesarion, only 17, was captured days later. Octavian's advisors debated his fate. The verdict was cold. Too many Caesars is not a good thing. The last heir of both Caesar and Cleopatra was quietly erased. Octavian returned to Rome as a hero, crowned not just in glory, but with a new name, Augustus. Rome rewrote the ending. They called her a harlot, a manipulator, a snake. They never forgave her for standing equal in a world that demanded submission. But she was more than Rome's insults. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, a scholar, a speaker of 9 languages, a queen who ruled in a man's world and refused to be owned by it. She wasn't perfect, but she was never powerless. She didn't bow, she didn't beg, she ruled. They tried to erase her, but 2,000 years later we still say her name. We still ask, was she a seductress or a strategist? Maybe she was both, or maybe she was something far more dangerous, a woman who ruled her own story.